We need a standard cheek swab to customize your new immune therapy. Those were the exact words the specialist used. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion, carrying that practiced, clinical detachment they teach in medical school. I was 34 years old. I was sitting in a freezing, sterile clinic just off Harmony Road, the thin paper gown crinkling loudly under my weight every time I shifted. The air in the room smelled aggressively of industrial bleach and rubbing alcohol, a sharp, chemical odor that burned the very back of my throat. I had no phone on me, no wallet, no watch, just the gnawing, suffocating anxiety of a recent autoimmune diagnosis that had been tearing my joints apart for 6 months. I swallowed hard, feeling the dry scrape of my own throat. Is there a problem with the blood work I submitted last week? The doctor, a man named Oris, with tired eyes and a perfectly pressed white coat, shook his head slowly. No, the blood work was sufficient for the preliminary panels. We just need this to customize the new immune therapy. I didn't realize that required genetic sequencing, I said, gripping the edge of the examination table. The cold steel seeped right through the paper, chilling the backs of my bare thighs. It's standard protocol for this specific biologic, Dr. Aris replied, his tone even and unbothered. It ensures the cellular markers align perfectly with the synthetic antibodies. All right, I breathed out, trying to release the tension coiling in my shoulders. If it helps get this autoimmune thing under control, do what you have to do. The doctor tapped his tablet with a stylus. Click, click, click. He didn't look up right away. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick, filling the small room like water rising in a locked tank. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to hum louder, a buzzing electric noise that drilled directly into my skull. My heart rate began to pick up, a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Then, he finally met my eyes. His expression had shifted. The clinical detachment was gone, replaced by a cautious, deeply uncomfortable pity. Your genetic markers are clear, Mr. Cross. We can proceed with the treatment, he said, his voice dropping half an octave. But our lab flagged an anomaly in your file during the familial baseline check. I frowned, the skin of my forehead pulling tight. An anomaly? What does that mean? You share absolutely zero genetic material with the child listed on your medical history. I stared at him. The words hung in the sterile air, nonsensical and absurd. I had a 3-year-old girl waiting for me in the lobby. She had my wife's green eyes, but she had my quiet demeanor. I had cut the umbilical cord. I had spent countless nights rocking her to sleep in the dark, breathing in the scent of baby lotion and warm milk. There has to be a mistake, I said, my voice sounding incredibly far away, as if someone else were speaking from the hallway. I've been her father since the day she was born. I'm sorry, Mr. Cross, Dr. Aris said softly, setting the tablet down on the stainless steel counter. The lab ran the sequence twice to be absolutely certain before I brought it up. There is no biological relation. My hands went completely numb. It wasn't a metaphor. The physical sensation of touch literally vanished from my fingertips, replaced by a cold, prickling static that raced up my forearms. The buzzing noise of the lights amplified until it was a deafening roar. My stomach plummeted, a sickening, weightless drop, as if the floor of the clinic had simply ceased to exist. I couldn't draw a full breath. The air felt too thin, too cold. 45 minutes later, operating entirely on muscle memory and shock, I walked out to the waiting room. The carpet was a garish blue with yellow geometric shapes. The receptionist was typing loudly on a mechanical keyboard. I bought my daughter a grape juice box from the vending machine. I handed it to her, feeling the condensation on the cardboard, and smiled at her while the world I knew burned to ash around us. But my wife had no idea what was coming, because she forgot one very important detail about the man she married. My name is Gideon Cross. I'm 34, and for the last 10 years, I've worked as a private investigator in Fort Collins, Colorado. Most people hear private investigator and picture a guy in a rumpled trench coat smoking cheap cigarettes under a flickering street lamp, nursing a bottle of whiskey in the glove box. The reality is a lot more boring and a lot more lucrative. I specialize in corporate espionage, insurance fraud, and deep background asset tracing. I spend my days tracking stolen funds across labyrinthine shell companies, cloning encrypted hard drives, and watching people lie for a living. Occasionally, I take high-end infidelity cases to pay the electric bill when corporate work is slow. Because of this, I know exactly how liars walk. I know how they talk, how their breathing changes, how their eyes dart to the left when they are inventing a narrative, and how they immediately deflect with anger when they're backed into a corner. I'm not a loud guy. I never have been. I grew up the middle child of 3 boys in a cramped, suffocating house that was always vibrating with screaming matches. The drywall was permanently dented from thrown plates. The air was constantly thick with the smell of cheap beer and resentment. My parents fought about money, about chores, about oxygen. The sheer volume of my childhood was traumatizing. I survived by fading into the background. I learned early on that the person talking is the person losing. Silence is a shield, but more importantly, it is a sponge. My Uncle Silas was the only quiet man I knew. He was an old-school skip tracer, the guy who taught me the ropes of the investigation business. We used to sit in his rusted-out 1988 Ford Bronco, the interior smelling perpetually of stale tobacco, wet dog, and old leather. We would drink terrible, bitter black coffee from a dented metal thermos, the liquid burning our tongues as we watched houses for hours in the freezing Colorado winters. He had a saying that became the foundation of my entire career, my entire worldview. He'd tap the cracked leather of the steering wheel with his calloused thumb, look out the frosted windshield and say, "A quiet man hears everything the loud man forgets," he said. I didn't know it then. Wrapped in my heavy parka and shivering in the passenger seat, but that single piece of advice would be the only thing keeping me out of a federal penitentiary 15 years later. I have a strange superpower. It's not something you can put on a resume, but it makes me exceptionally good at my job. I don't notice what's there. I notice what's missing. I notice the digital negative space. I notice when a 50-page bank statement is missing page 4. I notice when a car's odometer has exactly 32 unaccounted miles between Friday night and Monday morning. I notice when a spouse suddenly stops complaining about a specific, previously annoying coworker. The absence of data is often the most glaring data of all. I had no idea how much that one mundane skill would matter when it came to my own home. I always wanted a quiet life, just a small cabin up near Estes Park, the smell of pine needles in the morning, a decent truck with 4-wheel drive, and a family that didn't scream at each other. That was the dream. A simple, boring, beautiful life free from the chaotic noise of my youth. And then I met Sutton. And for the first time in my life, I thought I'd found my person. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. Sutton was a commercial real estate director. We met at a crowded, pretentious coffee shop near the university. The air was thick with the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of ceramic mugs, and the loud hum of college students arguing over philosophy. I was exhausted from a late-night surveillance job, my eyes burning. I had accidentally grabbed her Americano off the pickup counter, took a sip, and immediately grimaced because she had put an ungodly amount of vanilla syrup in it. It tasted like a melted candle mixed with battery acid. "Hey," a voice said over the din of the cafe. "I think you're drinking my sugar with a splash of coffee." I turned around. She was standing there, wearing a sharp, tailored navy blazer, her dark hair falling perfectly over her shoulders. She smelled faintly of jasmine and expensive dry cleaning. "Oh, sorry," I said, my face flushing hot. "I just grabbed the first Americano they called." "An honest mistake," she said, her lips curving into a smirk. "But your face is absolutely priceless." "It tastes like a melted candle," I muttered, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "I'll have you know that's a highly sophisticated, imported vanilla roast," she shot back, stepping closer. She laughed at my expression, a loud, genuine laugh that cut through the ambient noise of the cafe like a silver bell. She was vibrant. She was ambitious. She wore sharp suits and had this terrifying magnetic ability to walk into a room and make everyone desperately want to impress her. For a guy who spent his life observing people from the shadows, blending into the gray background of the world, being chosen by someone who lived so effortlessly in the spotlight felt like a miracle. It felt like I had been pulled out of the cold and invited to stand by the fire. We had good times. Really good times. I still remember our second anniversary. We rented a battered aluminum pontoon boat on Horsetooth Reservoir. The air was thick with the smell of sunscreen, lake water, and gasoline from the outboard motor. We brought a red plastic cooler full of icy Odell IPAs and cold, heavily battered fried chicken. The sun was setting over the foothills, casting this brilliant, blinding gold light across the rippling water. The temperature was dropping, the evening chill making the skin on my arms prickle. She leaned her head on my shoulder, the soft strands of her hair tickling my jaw. She wrapped her arms tightly around my waist, the warmth of her body pressing against mine. "I want to build an empire with you, Gideon," she whispered over the low idle of the boat's engine. "An empire sounds exhausting," I said softly, kissing the top of her head. "I just want this. Just us, the water, and the quiet." "We can have both," she insisted, squeezing me tighter. "You'll see. We're going to have everything." "As long as you're there," I told her. "I don't care what we build." God, we were so happy. But looking back, I realize I'm contaminating the memories. The brain does that. It tries to protect the beautiful moments by quarantining the disease. But the rot was already there. Every time I picture that golden afternoon on the lake, the taste of the cold beer, the warmth of her skin, I remember that the very next morning, she packed a sleek leather duffel bag and took a business trip to Denver. I now know she didn't go alone. The changes didn't happen overnight. Liars never flip a switch. They turn a dial. They boil the frog slowly so you don't realize you're burning until your skin peels off. The first red flag was the phone. It's always the phone. We used to leave our devices everywhere, tossed on the kitchen island, buried in the sofa cushions, left on the bathroom sink. But around the time our daughter Maya turned 2, Sutton's iPhone started living face down. Then it started coming into the bathroom with her while she showered. I could hear the muffled pop music playing over the running water, a flimsy acoustic shield so I wouldn't hear the ping of incoming messages. I noticed. I'm a PI. Of course I noticed. My brain is wired to catalog deviations from established patterns. But I told myself she was just stressed with a new, massive, commercial development project downtown. I rationalized it. I built the excuses for her. That's the tragedy of love. It makes a professional, cynical observer willingly, desperately blind. Then came the passwords. For 5 years, her passcode was 0814, our anniversary. One Tuesday evening, we were driving back from a hardware store. The cab of my truck smelled of potting soil and the pine air freshener dangling from the mirror. I grabbed her phone from the center console to order Thai food. I typed in the numbers. 0814. The screen shook. Incorrect. What's the new passcode? I asked casually, keeping my eyes on the road. I'm trying to get the pad Thai ordered before they close. Oh, corporate made us update our security protocols, she said smoothly from the passenger seat. She didn't hesitate. Her breathing didn't change. She reached over and plucked the phone directly out of my hand. I can just type it in, I said, feeling a strange, cold flutter in my chest. I said, give it here, Gideon, she replied, her tone sharpening just a fraction. I have to verify it with Face ID anyway. The new IT guy is a nightmare. Since when does a local real estate firm need NSA-level security? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Since we handle multi-million-dollar contracts, Gideon, she snapped, staring out the passenger window. Not everyone works out of their basement. I told myself it was nothing. I gripped the leather steering wheel, feeling the rough stitching under my thumbs, and let it go. It wasn't nothing. The third sign was the sudden, bizarre criticism. Out of nowhere, my clothes weren't right. My car was embarrassing. My job was creepy. One evening, she came home and tossed a heavy, glossy shopping bag onto the kitchen counter. Inside were 3 expensive, stiff-collared dress shirts. They smelled of sizing spray and luxury department stores. What are these? I asked, feeling the thick, unfamiliar fabric. They're for you. You need to upgrade your look, she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. You can't wear those faded flannels to my firm's cocktail party on Friday. I wasn't planning on going to the cocktail party, I said, setting the shirts down. And I like my flannels. Well, you are going, and you are wearing the blue one, she commanded, taking a long sip of her wine. I need you to look like a partner, not a lumberjack. I don't need to look like a partner, I argued gently. I'm a private investigator. You should be grateful, she would say, her eyes narrowing, her voice turning cold and sharp. Nobody else would put up with your paranoid moods and your refusal to elevate yourself. I'm trying to help you. That phrase, you should be grateful. She used it like a weapon, sliding it under my ribs and twisting it until I apologized for things I hadn't even done. It was guilt disguised as generosity, mixed with a desperate need to make me look better in front of her colleagues, so her own image wouldn't tarnish by association. The actual fracture, the exact moment the tempered glass of my reality cracked and I felt the freezing cold air rush in, happened on a Thursday in November. Sutton said she was at a zoning board meeting at City Hall. I was driving past the downtown area, heading to a client meeting regarding a fraudulent workers' comp claim. The heater in my truck was blasting, blowing dry, hot air onto my face. The sky was an overcast, bruised purple, threatening snow. As I idled at a red light, I glanced to my left. Parked outside a boutique hotel, 3 miles away from the municipal building, was Sutton's silver Audi. I recognized the custom license plate. I recognized the small dent on the rear bumper from when she backed into a shopping cart 2 years ago. My stomach dropped so violently I felt physically sick. The heat in my truck suddenly felt suffocating, choking me. My hands went ice cold, the leather of the steering wheel turning slick with instant, terrified sweat. The ambient noise of the afternoon traffic, the idle of engines, the distant siren, the ticking of my own turn signal, faded into a dull, rushing underwater hum. My heart pounded furiously against my sternum, a trapped bird battering itself against a cage. I didn't stop. The light turned green, and the car behind me honked. I hit the gas and kept driving. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white, my jaw locked so tight my teeth ached. I told myself there was a logical explanation. I forced the panic down into a tight, hard ball in my gut. Maybe the meeting was moved. Maybe she was meeting a client in the lobby for coffee. Maybe her car had broken down. I didn't check her phone that night. I didn't ask her about it. I couldn't bear to look into the negative space. I didn't want to know. But the seed of dread was planted, and it began to grow thick, suffocating roots deep in my chest. And then, 4 months later, came the clinic visit. The cheek swab, the cold room, the genetic anomaly, the absolute, undeniable scientific confirmation that my entire life was a fabricated theater production, and I was merely an unwitting extra. Most men would have exploded. They would have driven home like a maniac, kicked the front door completely off its hinges, and demanded answers. They would have thrown plates. They would have screamed until their vocal cords tore. But I am not a loud man, and I do not scream. I drove home from the clinic in total, absolute silence. I turned the radio off. I didn't turn on the heater. I just listened to the rhythmic thud of the tires against the pavement. I walked into the house. The air smelled of expensive vanilla diffusers and roasting garlic. Sutton was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island, typing furiously on her silver MacBook, a glass of Pinot Noir sweating beside her trackpad. Maya was upstairs taking a nap, the baby monitor glowing softly on the counter. "How is the doctor?" Sutton asked, barely glancing up from her screen. The keys clacked rapidly under her manicured fingers. "Fine," I said. My voice was incredibly steady. It was level. It was the voice of a ghost. "Just need to adjust my diet. Less inflammation." "See?" she muttered, taking a sip of her wine, leaving a faint red stain on the rim of the glass. "I told you it was nothing to panic over. You always assume the worst." "Yeah," I said, staring at the side of her face. "You were right." "Good. Listen, I need you to take Maya to your mother's this weekend," she said, finally looking up at me. Her green eyes were clear, bright, and completely devoid of guilt. "I have a massive closing dinner on Saturday with the city planning director." "All weekend?" I asked, my tone neutral. "Yes, all weekend," she sighed, sounding profoundly inconvenienced by my existence. "It's a delicate negotiation. I can't have Maya screaming in the background while I'm trying to finalize the permits." "I thought you finished that deal on Tuesday," I noted quietly. "Things change, Gideon," she snapped, her eyes flashing with sudden, defensive irritation. "Stop interrogating me, just take her." "Sure," I said. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I didn't flip the kitchen island or smash her wine glass against the wall. Because in my line of work, you don't present your case when you have one piece of evidence. One piece of evidence is a coincidence. Two is a suspicion. You present your case when you have the entire puzzle glued together, framed, and bolted to the wall so securely that not even a hurricane can tear it down. That was the exact night I officially took Sutton Cross on as a client. Or rather, a target. Over the next few weeks, as I began to dig, the escalation of her cruelty became almost unbearable. It was as if she sensed a microscopic shift in my energy, a change in the atmospheric pressure of our marriage, and decided to stomp it out before it could grow into rebellion. She began pushing boundaries, testing how much disrespect I would swallow before I choked. I cataloged these moments. I tracked them like a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. There were 10 distinct beats to her destruction. Beat 1 was the dinner with her family at a high-end, dimly lit steakhouse downtown. The air in the restaurant was heavy with the smell of charred meat, melting butter, and expensive cologne. The heavy silver cutlery clinked against porcelain plates. Her brother, Declan, was there. Declan was a loud, arrogant trust fund kid who had failed upwards into a consulting gig thanks to his father's connections. Halfway through the charred ribeyes, Declan wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and looked at me across the table. "So, Gideon," Declan drawled, swirling his bourbon. "How's the little detective agency doing? Catch any stray cats lately?" Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Sutton laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound that cut through the low jazz playing in the background. "Oh, Gideon just takes pictures of sad people in motel parking lots," Sutton said dismissively, waving her fork. "It's not exactly high finance, Deck. I'm the one paying the mortgage." I felt the sudden burning heat rise in the back of my neck. I looked at her. She just smiled at me, a cold, challenging smirk before taking a sip of her wine. "Is that right?" Declan chuckled. "Must be nice, kicking back while the wife brings home the bacon." "He tries his best," Sutton added, dripping with condescension. "But we can't all be executives." I didn't defend myself. I gripped my steak knife until the metal dug into my palm. I just took a bite of my steak, chewing slowly. Let her talk. Let her build her narrative. Beat 2 was the financial control. 3 days after the humiliating steakhouse dinner, I woke up early. The house was freezing. I logged into our joint checking account on my laptop to pay the quarterly property tax. The screen glared brightly in the dark living room. The balance was lower than it should have been. A lot lower. I dug into the transaction history, clicking back through the months, and found a recurring wire transfer. $4,500 a month, moving on the first of every month to an external routing number I didn't recognize. When she came downstairs, wrapped in her silk robe and smelling of morning coffee, I asked her about it. She didn't even blink. "What is this transfer to an account in Delaware?" I asked, turning the laptop screen toward her. "It's a high-yield escrow account for a new commercial property," she snapped instantly, her face flushing with immediate, aggressive anger. She began aggressively slamming the oak kitchen cabinets as she looked for a mug. "Since when do we use personal marital funds to float commercial escrow?" I asked calmly. "Why do you always twist things?" she shouted, turning on me. "You're living in a fantasy world, Gideon. You are so financially illiterate it hurts. If you understood how real estate actually worked, I wouldn't have to hide the boring details from you." "I'm just asking where the money went," I said. "It went to our future. God, you are suffocating me," she yelled, storming out of the kitchen. Beat 3 was the replacement. It was subtle at first, a sensory invasion of my home. I was in the basement doing laundry, the rhythmic thumping of the washing machine vibrating through the concrete floor. I was pulling her heavy beige trench coat out of the dry cleaning pile when I caught a scent. I buried my face in the collar. It wasn't her floral perfume. It was a heavy, expensive men's cologne. Oud wood, dark amber, and tobacco. It was a rich, cloying smell that burned my nostrils. I don't wear cologne. I use unscented, generic bar soap because smelling like absolutely nothing is a strict requirement when you're sitting in a hot car doing surveillance for 8 hours. The scent on her coat belonged to a man with money. A man who wanted to be noticed when he walked into a room. A man who was pressing very closely against my wife. Beat 4 was the public humiliation. Sutton's brokerage hosted a massive charity gala at the Drake Center. The ballroom was freezing, the air conditioning blasting to keep the massive swan ice sculpture from melting. The string quartet was playing something classical, but it was drowned out by the chatter of the city's elite. I wore the expensive, stiff blue suit she had forced me to buy. I stood quietly by her side, holding a glass of sparkling water, playing the role of the supportive, invisible husband. That was the night I officially met him. Julian Brooks. He was the deputy director of city planning. He was tall, impeccably tailored in a bespoke tuxedo, with a bright, predatory smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for hours. As he approached us, the smell hit me before he even spoke. Oud wood, dark amber, and tobacco. Sutton's entire body language shifted when he walked up. She leaned toward him, her pupils dilating, a flush rising on her chest. "Julian," Sutton beamed, introducing us. "This is my husband, Gideon." Gideon. Julian is the reason we finally got the zoning permits for the Mulberry Street project. Julian extended a hand. I took it. His grip was overly firm, aggressively squeezing my knuckles, the kind of handshake deeply insecure men use to assert physical dominance over a perceived rival. "Nice to meet you, Gideon," Julian said smoothly, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "Sutton tells me you're a private eye. Find any lost dogs lately?" Sutton laughed. She actually threw her head back, exposing her throat, and laughed loudly. "I told you, Julian. He thinks he's James Bond, but he's mostly just sitting in traffic eating fast food." She humiliated me in front of the man she was sleeping with. She actively diminished me to elevate him, to show him that she belonged to his world, not mine. I smiled, a tight, incredibly polite expression that didn't reach my eyes. "You'd be surprised what you find when you just sit and watch," I said quietly, holding his gaze. Julian's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of unease crossed his eyes. Sutton rolled her eyes, sighing loudly. "Oh, stop being weird and cryptic, Gideon," she scolded, waving her empty champagne flute at me. "Go to the bar and get me another drink. Be useful." Beat 5 was the spatial violation. This was the one that made the blood roar in my ears and almost made me break my own strict rules of engagement. I came home early from a surveillance job on a Tuesday afternoon. It was pouring rain outside. The house was quiet, save for the patter of water against the roof. I took off my wet boots and walked down the hallway toward my home office. My sanctuary. The one room in the house that was entirely mine. It was the place where I kept my locked filing cabinets, my secure servers, and my peace of mind. As I approached the closed door, I heard a deep, resonant voice. I pushed the heavy oak door open. Julian Brooks was sitting in my worn leather desk chair. He had his expensive Italian loafers kicked up on the edge of my mahogany desk. He was holding a crystal glass filled with my 20-year reserve bourbon. Sutton was leaning against my bookshelf, her arms crossed, laughing throatily at something he had just said. My blood pressure spiked so violently that my vision actually blurred at the edges, tunneling until all I could see was his smug face in my chair. The heat in my chest was explosive. "What is going on here?" I asked. My voice was eerily calm, but the air in the room instantly froze. The laughter died in Sutton's throat. Sutton recovered first, her eyes darting around the room. "Julian dropped by to review the new commercial blueprints. Your desk was the only one big enough to unroll them." I looked at the desk. There were no blueprints. There was only my laptop and his wet shoes on the wood. "I see," I said. I looked directly at Julian. "Get out of my chair." My voice was dangerously low. It wasn't a request. It was a physical threat wrapped in a whisper. Julian smirked, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. He took a slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting it burn down his throat before slowly lowering his feet and standing up. He smoothed his suit jacket. "Relax, Cross," Julian chuckled, patting my shoulder as he walked past me. "Just keeping it warm for you." After I heard the front door close, Sutton turned on me with a fury that was entirely fabricated, a loud, desperate noise designed to cover her overwhelming guilt. "You are so embarrassing," she screamed, her face flushed red. "He is a crucial high-level contact for my firm. You walk in here acting like a territorial caveman. Nobody else would put up with this paranoid, toxic behavior." Beat 6 was the gaslighting of my reality, the psychological sabotage. 3 days after the office incident, I woke up to find a crisp, white business card sitting on my placemat at the kitchen table. It smelled faintly of her peppermint gum. I picked it up. Dr. Elias Aries, Psychiatry and Behavioral Health. Sutton was leaning against the counter, sipping her coffee. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the card. "I made you an appointment for Thursday at 2, she said, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. "You need help, Gideon." "A psychiatrist? For what?" "For your paranoia," she said softly, shaking her head. "It's getting out of hand. You're tracking my moods. You're hostile to my colleagues. It's getting out. You're imagining things that aren't there." "I'm not paranoid, Sutton," I said, setting the card down. "I just notice things." "You imagine things," she snapped, dropping the concerned act instantly. "If you don't go to this appointment and get medicated, I'm taking Maya and staying at a hotel. I won't have my daughter around an unstable man." Beat 7 came from her enablers. Sutton had been busy planting seeds. 2 days later, Sutton's best friend, Mallory, cornered me at a neighborhood barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of burning charcoal, cheap hot dogs, and citronella candles. The afternoon heat was sticky and oppressive. Mallory was a ruthless real estate agent who worshipped the ground Sutton walked on. She backed me up against the wooden patio railing, holding a plastic cup sloshing with cheap red sangria. Her eyes were glassy. "You need to back off, Gideon." Mallory slurred slightly, poking a manicured finger into my chest. "Sutton is carrying this entire family on her back. She's under immense, crushing pressure at the firm." "I'm aware of her pressure," I said mildly, stepping back. "No, you aren't. You're tracking her, questioning her meetings, embarrassing her in front of Julian." "It's toxic," Mallory hissed, leaning in close. Her breath smelled of fermented fruit. "If you don't man up, get over your insecurities and support her, she's going to leave you. And honestly, she absolutely should." I realized then, staring at Mallory's flushed face, that Sutton had already spun a masterful narrative to her entire inner circle. I was the controlling, paranoid, financially inadequate, mentally unstable husband. She was the long-suffering, wildly successful, patient wife. She was building an exit strategy, laying the groundwork brick by brick, making sure she looked like a saintly victim when she finally pulled the trigger and left me for Julian. Beat 8 escalated things into the institutional realm. We had a massive argument in the living room over Maya. The tension in the house was a physical weight. I wanted to take Maya camping for the weekend up near Red Feather Lakes. I had bought a new tent. Sutton said no, claiming Maya had a co-worker's kid's birthday party to attend. "I never get a full weekend with her anymore," I argued, my voice rising just a fraction. "You're always dragging her to these corporate networking events. She's a kid. She needs to be outside." When I pushed back, Sutton's face went dead cold. The mask slipped completely, revealing the absolute sociopathy underneath. Her eyes went flat and shark-like. "You push me on this, and I'll call my lawyer tomorrow morning," she said. Her voice was a terrifying, flat whisper that chilled the blood in my veins. "I will file a protective order. I will tell the judge you have firearms in the house for your little detective job. I will tell them you refuse psychiatric help. I will say you're paranoid, that you have a history of stalking my movements. I will have you removed from this house in handcuffs by the police, Gideon. Do you understand me? You will never, ever see Maya again." She threatened to weaponize the police against me. She threatened to take the daughter I had raised, the daughter who wasn't biologically mine, but who I loved more than oxygen, more than my own life, away from me forever, based on a manufactured lie. Beat 9 was the cruelest moment of them all. It's the one that still makes my chest physically ache, a sharp stabbing pain behind my ribs when I think about it. It was Maya's preschool graduation, a stupid, trivial, chaotic event in a stuffy, overheated gymnasium where 4-year-olds wear flimsy paper hats and sing off-key songs. But it mattered to me. I had cleared my entire schedule. I had bought her a small stuffed bear. I arrived at the auditorium 10 minutes early. The air smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap perfume. I scanned the rows of metal folding chairs looking for my wife. Sitting in the third row, right in the center, was Sutton. And sitting right next to her, his arm casually draped over the back of her chair, holding a massive bouquet of pink tulips, was Julian Brooks. He was leaning in, whispering something in her ear. She was glowing, a radiant, triumphant smile on her face. Maya was on the wooden stage, wearing her little yellow paper hat. She was waving at them. She was waving at him. I stood in the back of the auditorium by the heavy double doors, leaning against the cold cinder block wall. I watched another man play father to the child I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd fed, the child whose nightmares I had chased away for 4 years. I watched my wife parade her lover in public, completely secure in her arrogance, completely certain that I was too weak, too broken, and too pathetic to do anything about it. I felt my chest caving in. My throat tightened so violently I couldn't swallow. The physical pain of the betrayal was agonizing. I am not proud of what I did next. Actually, no. That's a lie. I'm extremely proud, because that was beat 10. The breaking point. There was no explosion. No dramatic, movie screen speech. I didn't march down the center aisle and punch Julian in his perfectly shaven jaw. I didn't scream at Sutton in the parking lot and make a scene. I just felt a quiet, mechanical click in my brain. The atmospheric pressure in my head vanished. The husband died in that stuffy auditorium, bleeding out against the cinder block wall. And the private investigator took over. I left the school before the ceremony even ended. I drove to my office in complete, chilling silence. I walked in, locked the heavy deadbolt, sat down at my desk, and opened a fresh, encrypted digital case file. I labeled it Project Icarus. What nobody knew, what Sutton, in her infinite, blinding arrogance, completely failed to account for, was that I had already been building the case for 3 months. Ever since the freezing clinic visit, ever since the doctor told me the truth about my daughter, I had been working in the dark. Sutton thought I just took pictures of sad people in motels. She didn't understand digital forensics. She didn't understand asset tracing. She didn't understand what my profession actually entailed. My superpower was noticing the negative space. And the negative space in Sutton's life was massive. It was a gaping black hole. I started with the car. I had planted a magnetic GPS tracker in the rear wheel well of her Audi weeks ago. I knew she went to the boutique hotel every Tuesday and Thursday. I knew she visited Julian's massive, gated house in the foothills on the weekends I took Maya to my mother's. That was standard, boring infidelity stuff. It was enough for a divorce, but it wasn't enough for Icarus. I'm a PI who follows money. That's my specialty. And the $4,500 monthly wire transfers I found in our joint account were just a loose thread hanging from a very ugly sweater. I needed to pull it. Remember when I mentioned I had a secure server in my home office? The one Julian had the audacity to put his wet loafers on? Sutton thought she was so clever. She thought because she changed her phone password to something I didn't know, she was safe. But Sutton was deeply, fundamentally lazy with her operational security. She synced her iPhone to her MacBook so she could text from her keyboard. And her MacBook, connected to our home Wi-Fi, automatically backed up its entire hard drive every night at 2 a.m. to the shared network drive in my office. a drive I had total, unrestricted administrative access to. I didn't need her new passcode. I didn't need to touch her phone. I just needed to sit in the blue glow of my monitors, sipping stale tap water, and pull the raw, encrypted backup files from the router's cache. I ran them through a brutal decryption keybreaker program my tech buddy Hutch let me borrow. The tower hummed loudly, the fans whirring as the processor ran hot. It took 41 hours of continuous processing time to break her encryption. When the files finally cracked open, spilling their contents across my dual monitors, I didn't just find pathetic love letters and hotel receipts. I found a massive financial graveyard. Sutton wasn't just sleeping with Julian Brooks. She and Julian were running a highly sophisticated, coordinated embezzlement ring through the city's commercial zoning department. Here's exactly how it worked. Julian, in his role as Deputy Director of City Planning, had direct signatory authority over federal HUD, housing and urban development, grants, meant for urban revitalization in lower-income districts. Sutton, using her position as a commercial director, had quietly created 3 anonymous LLC shell companies: Apex Holdings, Blue Ridge Development, and Summit Logistics. Julian would approve massive federal grant money for these fake developments. Sutton would receive the funds into the LLCs, funnel them through her brokerage's legitimate accounts disguised as consulting and survey fees, and then kick exactly 50% back to Julian in offshore accounts registered in the Cayman Islands under his mother's maiden name. I sat in the cold blue glow of my monitors at 3 a.m, the house dead silent around me, endlessly scrolling through the PDFs, the ledgers, and the bank routing numbers. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. The total amount stolen over 3 years? $1,804,300. My wife wasn't just a cheater. She was a prolific federal criminal. And the $4,500 monthly wire transfers from our joint marital account, the ones she screamed at me about? She was using our personal, legally shared marital funds to pay the retainer for the shell company's registered agent in Delaware. She was intentionally intertwining the stolen money with my legal name. She was actively implicating me in the fraud. If the feds ever caught on to the shell companies, the money trail for the upkeep led directly to Gideon Cross. She was setting me up to be the oblivious fall guy, while she and Julian vanished with the millions. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I remembered Uncle Silas's advice in that freezing Bronco. "A quiet man hears everything the loud man forgets," he said. Sutton was so loud, so arrogant, so desperate to prove she was the smartest person in the room. She forgot that she left a digital footprint the size of a meteor crater. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a single word. Over the next week, I meticulously compiled every single PDF, every wire transfer receipt, every email exchange where they explicitly discussed the kickback percentages, and every single romantic, sickening text message they sent each other mocking me. I dumped it all onto a rugged, encrypted black USB drive. It felt heavy in my palm. It felt like a loaded gun. Then, I reached out to a secret ally. Agent Marcus Thorne, FBI White Collar Crimes Division, Denver Field Office. I had worked closely with Marcus 5 years ago on a massive corporate espionage case involving a tech firm. I trusted him. I called him on a prepaid burner phone. I drove down the interstate to Denver, met him at a dingy diner that smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee, and slid a thick, physical manila folder across the sticky vinyl table. It was just a taste of the evidence, just enough to set the hook. Marcus wiped his mouth with a napkin, opened the coarse folder, and looked at the documents. His eyes widened. He looked up at me, his expression grave. "What am I looking at, Gideon?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "Open it to the second tab," I said, taking a sip of the terrible diner coffee. "The Delaware LLCs." Apex Holdings, Blue Ridge. I know these names, Marcus muttered, flipping the pages. These are city developments. They're supposed to be, I corrected. Look at the routing numbers on the outgoing transfers. Marcus traced the numbers with his finger. He stopped. He looked at me, his jaw tight. This involves federal housing funds, Gideon. This is HUD money. This is a massive wire fraud case. If I open this officially, there is no closing it. I can't protect her. Your wife is going to federal prison for a very long time. I know, I said. My voice didn't waver. You're absolutely sure about this? Marcus pressed, leaning over the table. Once I take this to the SAC, it's out of my hands. It's a runaway train. She stopped being my wife a long time ago, Marcus, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I'm not asking for protection. I'm asking how long to get the warrants. Marcus closed the folder. He tapped it twice. Give me 2 weeks. I spent those agonizing 2 weeks playing the perfect, pathetic, subservient husband. It was the greatest undercover performance of my life. I cooked her dinner. I kissed her cheek when she came home smelling of his cologne. I let her insult my clothes. I let her roll her eyes at my job. I went to the psychiatrist appointment and sat quietly while the doctor asked me if I felt unreasonably suspicious of my spouse. I protected my absolute most valuable asset, my daughter. I quietly met with a brutal, highly expensive family law attorney downtown. Because I was legally on Maya's birth certificate and had raised her since birth, Colorado law recognized me as her psychological and legal father. The biological anomaly didn't matter in the eyes of the family court, especially not when weighed against Sutton's impending federal indictment for $1.8 million in wire fraud. The lawyer assured me I would get full, uncontested custody. I had the thick stack of paperwork drawn up, signed, and ready to file the second the hammer dropped. The reversal happened on the third Tuesday in November. Exactly 1 year, to the very day, after I first saw her silver Audi parked at that boutique hotel. Sutton was hosting a massive celebratory dinner party at our house. She had just officially closed the Mulberry Street deal, the biggest, most lucrative fraudulent grant yet. She invited her brother Declan, her best friend Mallory, and of course the guest of honor, Julian Brooks. She wanted to gloat in front of me. She wanted to show off her magnificent empire in my own house, forcing me to serve the wine and clear the plates while she held court with the man she was sleeping with. It was the ultimate power play. I played the role perfectly. I bought expensive, thick-cut steaks from the butcher. I seared them in butter and rosemary, filling the house with a rich, savory smell. I poured the expensive Cabernet into crystal glasses. The setting was our formal dining room. We sat around the heavy oak table. The room was bathed in low, warm amber lighting from the crystal chandelier overhead. Outside the bay windows, the temperature had plummeted, and snow was falling heavily, blanketing Fort Collins in a quiet, suffocating white. We were at peak, nauseating smugness. Julian was sitting at the head of the table. He was sitting in my chair. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit, holding up a glass of dark red wine. To Sutton, Julian said smoothly, his baritone voice echoing in the room. His eyes locked onto hers with an unmistakable, naked intimacy that made my skin crawl. The sharpest, most brilliant mind in Fort Collins real estate. And to the Mulberry Project. Brilliant. We're building the future of this city. Declan and Mallory cheered loudly, clinking their heavy crystal glasses together. Sutton beamed, a flush rising on her cheeks, looking at Julian like he was a god who had descended from Olympus just for her. Thank you, Julian, Sutton said, her voice dripping with affection and desire. She glanced over at me. I was standing near the kitchen doorway, holding a white towel. And thank you, Gideon, well, for picking up the stakes. The table chuckled softly. The disrespect was so casual, so effortless, so deeply practiced. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just looked at my watch. It was 7:42 p.m. You know, Julian, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient chatter and the clinking of silverware like a razor blade. I let the towel drop to the counter. I walked slowly toward the table, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. I was actually looking over the Mulberry Project blueprints today. Julian smirked, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his wine. I doubt you'd understand them, Cross. It's a little more complex than tracking cheating husbands to cheap motels. You're right, I said, stopping right behind his chair. I could smell the oud wood and tobacco radiating off his neck. It is incredibly complex. For instance, I couldn't quite figure out why a $600,000 HUD grant designated for urban revitalization was wired directly to Summit Logistics, LLC in Delaware, and then immediately transferred less than an hour later to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands registered under your mother's maiden name. The entire room went dead, terrifyingly silent. The only sound was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The smirk vanished from Julian's face. It didn't simply fade. It was instantly erased, replaced by a pale, chalky, hollow terror. His eyes widened, fixing on the wall ahead of him. Sutton slowly lowered her wine glass. Her hand was trembling so violently that the dark red liquid sloshed over the crystal rim, dripping down her fingers and staining the pristine white tablecloth like fresh blood. Gideon, Sutton said. Her voice was tight, high-pitched, and breathless. What are you talking about? Are you drunk? I'm perfectly sober, I said, my voice eerily calm. I began pacing slowly around the edge of the large oak table, walking towards Sutton. I also couldn't figure out why my wife, the brilliant real estate mind, was using our joint marital checking account to pay the registered agent fees for 3 fraudulent shell companies. It almost looked, to the untrained eye, like she was trying to frame me for federal embezzlement. Shut up, Julian hissed. He stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, a harsh, screeching sound. Sutton, get him out of here right now. I don't think I'll be leaving, I said softly. I reached into my inside jacket pocket. I pulled out the heavy, black encrypted USB drive. The metal was cold against my skin. I tossed it onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a loud, heavy clack right next to the artisan charcuterie board. There's $1.8 million in stolen federal funds detailed on that drive, I said, looking directly into Sutton's horrified eyes. Every bank routing number, every forged signature, along with 4,200 text messages between the two of you, including the ones from last Tuesday, where you joke about me paying the mortgage while Julian sleeps in my bed. Mallory gasped loudly, dropping her silver fork onto her plate with a sharp clatter. She pressed her hands over her mouth. Declan stared at his sister, his jaw literally hanging open, his arrogant bravado entirely evaporated. Sutton stood up on shaky legs. Her face was completely bloodless, a ghostly, sickly white. The arrogant, untouchable, powerful real estate director was gone. She looked incredibly small. She looked terrified. Her chest heaved as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. Gideon, please, she whispered. Her voice cracked, a pathetic, broken sound. You don't understand. We can explain everything. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll give you the house. Please, please don't do this. I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. You should be grateful, I said, echoing her favorite, sharpest weapon, my voice devoid of any pity. Nobody else would put up with this. Before she could even open her mouth to respond, the heavy, rhythmic, deafening pounding started at the solid oak front door. Bang, bang, bang. FBI, open the door! Federal agents. Sutton flinched violently, her shoulders jumping up to her ears as if she had been physically struck by a baseball bat. Julian backed away from the table, his eyes darting frantically toward the back patio doors, calculating the distance to the snowy yard like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. But I had already unlocked the side gate for the tactical team 20 minutes ago. The blinding white beams of heavy flashlights were already sweeping back and forth across the snow-covered backyard, illuminating the glass doors. Agent Marcus Thorne walked into the dining room, snow dusting the shoulders of his dark windbreaker. He was flanked by 3 large agents in full tactical gear, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. The cold winter air rushed into the warm house, chilling the dining room instantly. "Julian Brooks? Sutton Cross?" Marcus said. His voice was a booming, authoritative thunder that shook the room. "You are both under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and the embezzlement of federal funds." I stepped back, pressing my shoulders against the cool floral wallpaper. I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute destruction of the empire she thought she had built. 2 agents moved swiftly, grabbing Julian and pushing him roughly against the wall. He didn't fight back. He just went limp. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists with a sharp, ratcheting sound. He was stammering, his voice cracking, openly crying, begging the agents to listen to him, telling them it was all Sutton's idea. A female agent stepped up to Sutton, grabbing her arms and pulling them firmly behind her back. The handcuffs clicked. In the sudden quiet of the room, it was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It sounded like a vault door slamming shut. Sutton twisted her head, looking over her shoulder at me. Hot tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her expensive foundation, ruining her perfect mascara. "Gideon!" she sobbed, struggling uselessly against the agent's grip. "Gideon, please, do something. I'm your wife, please." I looked at her. I searched my chest for something, anything. But I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel betrayal. I just felt a profound, overwhelming, beautiful sense of peace. The storm was over. I gave her a small, polite smile. "I'm just a quiet man," I said. I turned my back on her screams, walked up the carpeted stairs, and went to pack my daughter's bags. The aftermath was a spectacular, devastating cascade of consequences. The federal government does not play games when it comes to stolen HUD grants. They don't negotiate, and they don't show mercy. Within 2 weeks of the raid, Sutton's real estate brokerage fired her, stripped her name from the building, and publicly disavowed any knowledge of the scheme to save themselves from federal scrutiny. Her assets were entirely frozen. The feds seized everything: the silver Audi, her diamond jewelry, the offshore bank accounts, the investments. Within a month, Julian Brooks flipped. To save himself from a maximum 20-year sentence, he cut a deal and testified against Sutton, providing his own private emails showing she was the primary mastermind who set up the shell companies and handled the routing numbers. So much for true love and building an empire together. Within 2 months, the enablers fell. Mallory, who the FBI discovered had been receiving small, $5,000 kickbacks disguised as referral fees from Sutton's fraudulent accounts, was heavily investigated by the State Real Estate Commission. She lost her license permanently, faced massive fines, and had to move out of Fort Collins in absolute disgrace. Declan, who had spent years loudly bragging at country clubs about his sister's immense wealth, suddenly found himself unemployable when the local news plastered Sutton's crying mugshot across the front page of the Sunday paper. The family court judge granted me sole legal and physical custody of Maya in a hearing that lasted less than 20 minutes. Sutton's panicked lawyers desperately tried to argue the paternity test, bringing up the cheek swab, but the judge took one look at her pending federal indictment for $1.8 million in fraud, her frozen assets, and her impending prison sentence and shut them down immediately. I walked out of the courthouse holding Maya's hand, legally and permanently her father. Facing a mountain of digital evidence she couldn't fight, Sutton took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Julian got 10. 6 months after she was incarcerated, I walked out to my mailbox and found a letter. It had a cheap, stamped federal prison return address in the corner. I recognized her handwriting immediately. It was frantic, scrawled, the ink bleeding in spots. I opened it, feeling the rough, cheap paper between my fingers. She begged for forgiveness. She wrote page after page about how sorry she was, how she had been manipulated by Julian, how she realized now that I was the only man who had ever truly loved her. She asked, in a desperate, pleading postscript, if I would please bring Maya to visit her on the upcoming visiting day. I didn't write back. I walked into my home office, turned on the heavy-duty crosscut shredder, and fed the pages into the metal teeth, listening to the satisfying hum of the blades, turning her apologies into confetti. Closure isn't about having the last word. It's about reaching a point where you no longer need one. My life looks very different now. I sold the massive, hollow house in the suburbs. I took my savings, the money I had quietly protected, and finally bought that small cabin up in Estes Park. It's perfect. It's made of thick, rough-hewn cedar, smelling strongly of wood smoke and pine resin, with a wide wraparound porch that looks out over the towering pine trees and the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. I still run my PI firm, but I'm highly selective about my cases now. I only take the ones that interest me. I spend my weekends walking down to the river behind our property, the freezing water rushing over smooth stones, teaching Maya how to cast a fishing line. I was sitting on the wooden porch yesterday morning, wrapped in a heavy flannel shirt. I was holding a ceramic cup of bitter black coffee, feeling the heat seep into my palms as I watched the brilliant gold sun crest over the mountains. The air was biting, cold, and incredibly crisp, filling my lungs with clean oxygen. Maya was sitting on the wooden steps a few feet away, bundled up in a puffy pink coat, quietly drawing trees in a spiral sketchbook with a blue crayon. It was quiet, perfectly, beautifully, absolutely quiet. There was no screaming. There was no lying. There was no tension vibrating in the floorboards. Uncle Silas was right all those years ago in that freezing truck. A quiet man hears everything the loud man forgets, he said. And sometimes, if he's patient enough, if he watches the negative space long enough, the quiet man gets exactly everything he ever wanted.